The necklace of quiet claim. I first noticed the necklace because it looked slightly out of place in the wash of white aprons and starched collars. An old, simple chain with a small oval locket, worn soft by years against a woman's skin. It was one of those details you register without meaning to. A pale flash of metal when a hand moved, a shape against a throat. I glanced at it and then immediately at Liza's face. Her hand tightened on my sleeve like a vice. She thought I had been looking where a gentleman ought not look. The air in the drawing room narrowed. Liza was everything one expects of an elegant fiancée, polished, decisive, trained in the gestures of high society. She misread my momentary attention as insolence, and angry and swift, she berated the maid, Amalia, right there. Her voice cut through the low murmur of tea and strangers like broken glass. Amalia shrank into herself, hands folded as if to hide the locket. I tried to stop Liza, to explain the truth, how the necklace had only seemed familiar. Yet words only fanned Liza's fury. She ordered the maid to remove the chain, demanding proof that the household maintained proper deference. The maid's fingers trembled as she touched the locket. She begged for a moment, saying it mattered to her more than anything. Liza laughed it off and grabbed it anyway. It was watching that small, frightened exchange, watching the way Amalia's chin went white when the locket was wrenchingly pulled away. That made anger bloom in me. I could not stand idle. I shelled off Liza's signet ring and put it down on the table. I declared, without much ceremony, but with every ounce of certainty I possessed, that our engagement was over. Liza's apology came fast and loud, the sort meant to smooth social standing, rather than mend what it had broken. She stood there lobbying for my forgiveness, but the calm assurance I had once found in her company had been stripped away. It was not merely that she had humiliated Amalia. It was the way she had made humiliation pleasurable in the name of propriety. I could not imagine a life with someone who did not understand the weight of small mercies. Left alone with Amalia, after the household had settled into embarrassed silence, I helped her pry apart the tiny clasp. Inside the locket was not jewelry, but a folded scrap of paper, and beneath it, a photograph so faded the faces were soft smudges. When she unfolded the paper, she held it like something sacred, her fingers afraid they might tear the past. She told me then, in a voice that was mostly steady, except for the tremor under it, that the locket had been her grandfather's. He had raised her alone after her parents' deaths, taught her to mend hems and habits and to read beyond the headlines in the town paper. To him, everything, even a modest locket, was a repository of memory. She hesitated when I asked about the photograph. The shape of her answer made my chest tighten. "He served a noble house once," she said finally. "He always told me to keep this close. He said, when the world looks at you as less than you are, remember who taught you to be more than smallness." We spent the day wandering through the walled garden, the soft decline of sun making everything forgiving. Conversation came easy between us in a way it had not with Liza. Small confessions, the kind of jokes that grew into longer silences, and then, without announcement, into the sensation that one's thoughts had found a second light. Amalia spoke of evenings by a coal stove, of a grandfather who had loved horticulture and music, of how she could make a dress from 2 yards and call it elegant. I began to learn the parts of her people missed, the fierce patience, the steady humor, the unshowy intelligence. I was not moved by the drama of social station. I was moved by how she listened, by how she watched my hands when I told stories, as if mapping the shape of how I felt. We agreed to meet again the following day at dusk. It was an appointment made of something close to hope, an unguarded plan, the sort that often collapses under other people's schemes. And yet, when I went to find her the next morning, I was stopped by Thorpe, the butler, calm, efficient, formally loyal to old rules. He told me in that tight voice servants sometimes used when speaking of private affairs masked as public consent, that he planned to propose to Amalia and wanted my blessing. He said he and she had been seeing each other for years. I felt a cold thread of suspicion. It was not the first time I had seen Thorpe orchestrate appearances to smooth a household's management. He had, after all, the practical temperament of someone who had spent a lifetime concealing cracks. The details he gave felt rehearsed. I told him, carefully, that I had spoken plainly with Amalia and that she had no such understanding with Thorpe. But my words hung loosely. Already I could sense a narrative taking shape that did not include me. Later, the same morning, Amalia, unable to wait, went in search of me. She crossed the corridor and fatefully met Liza. What happened next was a cruel thing of spoken possibilities. Liza, eager to tidy the mess she had created, told Amalia that I had forgiven her and that things were as they had been. She spun a small fiction and the kind of false reassurance practiced for salons and dinners. Amalia, fragile and naive about such social maneuvering, heard what Liza wanted her to hear. She left believing that I had come to my senses and that there was no place in her life for more than the quiet work she had always known. When she finally found me, she was unbound by civility, the world undone at the seams. Tears tracked down her face. She asked, simple and wounded, why I had not come when she thought we would meet. I was stunned. Her distress felt like an accusation and a plea all at once. I asked about Thorpe. She, too, had been told a version that did not include the truth. She had been told Thorpe sought her hand, that they had been discreetly seeing one another. The look she gave me then, disbelief folded into embarrassment into a creature I recognized and loved, cleared the fog. We had both been manipulated into mistrust. Once the immediate panic subsided, Amalia told me more of the locket. She admitted, with a reluctance that made her seem younger than she was, that her grandfather had been connected to a minor branch of a princely family, an exile of sorts in their own country, stripped of much but still proud of a name that opened doors in old registers and on aging title deeds. There had been whispered talk at his death of rightful claims and a legal paper he had hidden because he feared those claims would ruin the quiet life he had built for his granddaughter. Inside the locket was not magic, but an index, a folded note in his careful, cramped hand naming her as Amelia of the De La Roche line. A small branch once granted the courtesy title of Countess in the provincial records, and instructions to seek out the registry chest in the study should anyone ever question her right to be heard. The letters said nothing of crowns or castles. They were about proof, about historical fact. He had wanted her to know where she came from, not to be forced into public life, but to have the option if she ever needed it. We opened the paper chest in the study that night. There were, as he had promised, birth certificates, old ledgers, a faded portrait of a young man with a De La Roche jaw. The documents did not confer estates or fortune. They conferred lineage and a sliver of recognition in a world that liked its ranks tidy. For the first time, Amalia saw herself in official ink rather than merely in the memory of an old man's stories. It would have been easy for her to accept the title offered by those who saw advantage in it. It would have been equally easy for others, Liza perhaps chief among them, to manipulate the story to their own ends. But Amalia surprised me. She put the papers back in their box and slid it under the study table, as if to say lineage was a fact, but not a demand. She had no desire to take on a name as armor, but she did not want to be deprived of the proof of who she had been. Liza and Thorpe were exposed in time, not by scandal, but by the quiet method of truth. Documents located by a solicitor who, once asked, did what solicitors do, verified, recorded, and moved on. Liza left for those who preferred performances of propriety over the messy integrity of a real life. Thorpe resigned, his loyalty misplaced in the wrong house. In the end, we did not marry into pomp or expectation. We married because the ordinary acts of care between two people became more important to us than names on a register. Our small ceremony bore no grand title. There were no throngs to witness us, only a few friends, the memory of a grandfather who had loved a granddaughter in the only way he knew how, and a ring I slipped on a hand that had, in truth, always cared for others more than for itself. Amalia kept the locket. She never wore it as a banner. She wore it as a private thing, a reminder of where she came from, and of the night we learned that honesty, not station, is what turns two lives toward one another. Sometimes, in the quiet hours when city lights blur beyond the garden, she will touch the clasp and smile. A small, steady gesture that tells me everything, that she chose a life by feeling and fidelity, and that our love began not because a lineage demanded it, but because two people finally stopped pretending to be anything but human. And if there is one truth this story taught me, one quiet lesson that settled deeper than all the noise that surrounded us, it is this: love does not measure lineage, wealth, or the roles society assigns. It recognizes character, kindness, and the courage to choose what feels right, even when the world expects something else. In the end, it is not titles that make a life meaningful, but the people who stand with you when you have nothing left to prove. Dot.